Hi there, it's Mary Maguire here. I'm on day 3 of my 5-day live streams, lunchtime, short slots, where we're looking at the issues surrounding women in the workplace in wider society based on the celebration of International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March this year. And it's also Women's History Month in the USA, all of March, which is great. So I'm taking these short slots to look at 5 particular aspects of gender equality, what the issues are, what we can consider about them, and what we can do, what actions we can take to do that. Some of them are organisational, some of them are individual. So I think a lot of you know me now, but I'm the founder of Agents to Change, which has been around since 2008, helping organisations to create businesses of belonging. And I'm also the author of a number of books, including Female Edge, which is about women finding success in the workplace, and the Inclusion Edge, which is about building more inclusive organisations. So today, what I'm going to talk to you about is how we remove barriers to women's participation in the workplace. So this is in celebration of International Women's Day. In 2025, every year, International Women's Day happens on the 8th of March. And every year they have a particular theme that they talk about. This year it happens to be Accelerate Action. And really the call is for us to look at what we can do to address what we know are the known issues and known barriers to equality or participation for women in the workplace. Now, I'm focusing very much on women because that's what International Women's Day is about. But what I say, and I've said in the previous 2 sessions as well this week, is while we're looking at it from a perspective of women, if we address the issues and the needs of women in terms of their full participation and their full level of opportunity in society, we know that it will also help to open the door for other groups that are also poorly represented, um, be that by gender or ethnicity or race or LGBT status or disability status. So we know it's a helpful way of being the tip of the iceberg to help move change along. I'm only talking about women, but I really see this as something that has wider applications. Now, in the first one, I talked about what is happening, where are the gaps happening, why are they happening, and why we should be concerned about that and what we can do about that. Yesterday, what we talked about was the ways that we can create safe, supportive spaces for women to excel in the workplace. So today, I'm going to talk about how we can think about the barriers that exist for women and what we can do to remove them. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. But let me start by the barriers that exist. Probably the biggest one, and the one we know about, is bias. So there's quite a bit of unconscious and sometimes conscious bias in the way that we make assumptions around women, their capability, their potential, and therefore by making a bias which says that they are potentially less likely to be as capable as a man in the same role, or less likely to be able to perform as a man with the same level of experience and qualifications. We create barriers for them being able to find opportunities and to progress. Now, that unconscious bias is something that I know a lot of organisations are dealing with now. There's an awful lot of training out there, some fantastic training on LinkedIn Learning, as well as I'm sure in your own in-house learning catalogues as well. So that is one way we can think about it, is we can just raise our awareness by actually asking questions as we're making decisions, wherever them decisions are going to be, whether it's decisions which are as simple as the employee of the week or the employee of the month, and whether we have a track record of favouring people from a particular gender or ethnic group, or whether it's something more specific like thinking about a promotion, thinking about somebody who you want to lead up a special project or second to a particular area of the organisation. So all of them can be things that actually have bias in them. And by just raising a question about, but am I thinking about this fairly? Would I use the same criteria for, and then whoever the opposite group is, a woman, a black person, a person with a disability, whatever that might be. So you need to think about what are the different ways that might be coming through. But if we understand that bias is really baked into everywhere, we can look at ways we can open that up. Probably one of the biggest areas for organisations is the way that they go out and recruit for new roles. So when we think about when we've got a new position happening, there's a number of things we need to think about, and that is the who do we see as the people who are suitable for it? What are the things we're expecting them to do, and where do we want them to be? And I just want to pull them out a bit more because they're all ones that can actually help us with that. If we think about the job requirements for a role, many organisations just recycle the same job requisition, the same job requirements, and they don't really look at it, take a step back and say, but are these requirements A, still valid, and B, allowing us to have the widest network of people, talent, applicants who actually would be interested in this role. The difficulty with the recycle route of job requisitions and job postings is that we can have something that's maybe 5, 6, 7 years out of date, and we haven't chosen to critically look at that. I know why that happens. Hiring managers are busy, recruiters often are working at scale and they don't have time to do that. But as a result of that, we can send out expectations which really don't fit either the current way we work or what is really required for the job. So there's a few ways we've seen that come up. And one of the things is if we put requirements in the job, which actually have traditionally been part of it, but we've changed the way we work, aren't anymore. One of the big ones would be things like level of travel required if it's a role that actually oversees a number of teams in different locations. And if it assumes things like 40, 50% travel, it's likely to take out quite a number of people who have caring or parental responsibilities. And what we know from research, and this really doesn't change, is that tends to be 65% women who have them responsibilities versus 35% men. So we know that we need to think about if we're putting these requirements in, are we saying we're assuming that it's likely to be a man who's going to fit that role? And if we are, why? And whether that is also a genuine requirement of the job, the travel, or whether some of it can be done through more remote and technology-based solutions. The other things we see happening is that maybe we're putting in qualifications or level of experience, which again has been traditionally used, but isn't often a good marker of performance when people are in the role. Uh, Education, particularly if we're saying a type of education or even a type of institution that people have been to, is it an institution that's likely to have very high levels of expectations of entry, so therefore be more exclusive and take out quite large swathes of the population who would equally be suitable to do the role? And then the other thing, and again, this is where some of my clients have done well, is when they've looked at the data of who is applying for the roles, where are they coming from, where are we asking for applicants? When they look at the data more critically, they find that there's various things they can do to remove some of these implicit barriers to participation in job recruitment. So one of them was an interesting one was when a client of mine was trying to increase the number of female applicants for a role. So this isn't to guarantee a woman to get the job, but they wanted a wider range of women applying for a traditionally male role, is they found that women just took longer to decide to apply. They traditionally kept the job open for 2 weeks and then carried on with the active recruitment. And by leaving it open another week or two, they found that they actually got more female applicants through, and that led towards the end of the process to more females in roles. The other thing was thinking about how to simplify the application process. So rather going through a process which was CV based and a screening through that, is they use simpler qualification questions, which actually help them to screen people based on their mindset, their understanding of the role, and their clarity about what they would bring to the role. And that actually took away an awful lot of implied bias that we can have through CVs, which are written often very differently if it's a man or it's a woman. And then the final thing was how the how the selection process was done, and looking at what was the panel they had. So was the panel all the majority employees who were typical of that workforce now? So if it was a white male dominated workforce, was that typical of the way that the panel was made up? Or could they find ways of bringing more of a diverse panel in, so that even in the selection process, if there were people who did not traditionally do that role, they could at least see people and faces that they felt more comfortable represented them, and they could see that if they could see them in that role, they could see themselves in that role. They're all small things, but they make a huge difference to how people feel they will be accepted in the role. So the second thing is ways of working. If people are in a role, what are the ways that we can maybe remove barriers that exist that actually don't need to exist because they have been traditionally the ways that we have worked? Now, COVID was a big disruptor for this because before COVID, what we had as a view is that most people had to be in particularly office-based workers. If you're in healthcare or other direct services, this doesn't apply as much. But let's say most of the people that I would work with would have some sort of office-based role. Pre-COVID, it was the expectation that it was 90% of the time in the office. Working from home might be available to people maybe one day every 2 weeks, or if they were lucky, one day a week, but that would be it. And the rest of the time, people were expected to be in the office. But after COVID, we started to see that this idea of hybrid working was starting to get hard baked in the way that we thought about work. Has been both a blessing and a curse for women who have parental and caring responsibilities, but it did certainly help to alleviate some of the pressures of having to work around school runs, childcare drop-offs, commuting to work, getting to the office. But it hasn't solved all the issues, and it had caused further pressures. So I think what we've seen organisations doing is looking at what does hybrid mean. It certainly doesn't mean 90% of the time guaranteed at home, because we know that that doesn't help with the organisation culture. But at the same time, it can't flip to 90% in the office either, because not only women but men also, and certainly people with other needs, are finding that actually the hybrid working is much more beneficial to the way that they can participate. But thinking about hybrid in relation to core hours, core days in the office where the team get together, and having them more fixed so that they can actually be worked in advance. They can either be core days based on weekdays that everyone is in the office, or based on a calendar of events that's created, I think is really important. And when people are in the office, making sure that things happen that make it worthwhile being in the office, like face-to-face meetings, other communication events, other just general engagement events. And I'll talk about networking in a minute. But the other thing to think about is when people are not in the office, and even when they are, is thinking about the times that meetings are set. So always having meetings set at 9 a.m., when actually the meeting could just as easily happen at 10 a.m., and take the pressure off any of your employees, mainly women, but not all, who have to do things like the school run and the drop off for childcare, or deal with other caring responsibilities that might be going on. So rather than creating a pressure, which means that they're likely to come to meetings flustered or potentially late because they've had to balance them, and have some of the potential microaggressions from other workers who don't have them pressures coming at them in that meeting, moving the meeting back a bit, negotiating a bit more time around things makes a huge difference. And thinking about that on the later part of the day as well, thinking about 3 till 4:30 being times where, unless it's urgent or really important, blocking off that and saying that's non-meeting times as well. Now, I say that knowing that there will be days, there will be times, there will be events where you can't do that. I think everyone understands that. But just having for the ebb and flow of regular meetings and the cadence of them thinking about that. The other thing as well is to, think about where you can make hybrid work more effective by avoiding other pinch points in the day for people. So where can you find some flexibility for people so that they can find time to get together without it feeling like we're rushing into meetings from one to the next? What we're finding, and definitely since COVID, is it tends to be most of the organizational activities tend to be meeting driven, whether that's because it's very project based or whether it's very much about collaboration and decision making or even sharing information. But where you know that not every meeting is essential for everyone to attend, is just allowing some flexibility and real clarity about, is it a decision, is it an information, if it is, who needs to be there. And that allows for a little bit of more flexibility for people to just have more routine, more flexible, more relaxed conversations with colleagues that would have happened around the water cooler more often in the past and doesn't. And it allows them to give a bit more time for that. Plus, also blocking time in the diary for getting on with all of the actions that come out of all these meetings that become difficult to follow on if we're constantly in them. The third area I would talk about is networking and socializing. Where that happens, when it happens, and the timing of that as well. So another thing we know, and this is a very big gender split, is we know that traditionally in organisations, men had more access to networking, informal and more planned networking than women did. And that might be at the end of the office day, shall we go down to the local pub and have a drink, or whether it was something like more planned things around a sporting event such as golf or some big tournament day where colleagues could attend, and it was often easier for the males rather than the females to do that. So you have to think about, well, what can we do to make that more even? Because if we're talking about people having caring or childcare responsibilities, coming to the pub for an hour or two at the end of a day really isn't possible. But that means they maybe lose out on opportunities to hear about either things that are going on, the wider network of people, or changes in the organisation that other people will be hearing about. So thinking about where can we create opportunities that maybe aren't around alcohol, for any of your employees that maybe follow a lifestyle which is not based around alcohol, not based around sporting activities, where again it might be more of a narrow interest and a narrow profile of your employees that would be willing to do that, and also allows for it to happen maybe more in the workplace as well. So whether it can be more lunch-based communications or fireside chats, which are happening inside the working week, but allows for people to maybe mix across departments, across different parts of the organisation as well, because that's where we find that important conversations happen. And then the final one is just thinking about what's happening in terms of decisions around helping people reviewing people who may be good for promotion or for special projects or for secondments that are going on. So again, I'll be talking tomorrow about data. That's an important one to think about there. But just in relation to this, is thinking about, are we finding it's the same names coming up again and again and again for special projects? Are we doing for promotions? Are we finding that we're going for the same type of person when we're promoting them into new roles? And when we're thinking about secondments, are we making assumptions about who's the right person to go into them roles? And how do we open up the criteria? How do we open up our thinking so that the opportunities that may be available for people to grow, to build their portfolio of skills, to showcase their own abilities to do more, to be more, isn't being stifled because we are going down a well-trodden path of people who we believe are a safe pair of hands, and not giving them opportunities to people who maybe have equal potential but are not being given the opportunities to show that. So, thinking a bit more in terms of the questions you ask, the data you bring, the people you are considering when you're making these decisions, and whether you can open that up and maybe see whether there has been traditionally a gender bias and whether something can be done about that. Now, I talked yesterday, so I'm not going to go into today, is if you do make them decisions, is how can you support them in their role? Because if they're people who are likely to be the only person who's typically being put into that role, and then they'll need some support around them as well. So I think that's it I wanted to talk about today in terms of thinking about barriers. So thinking about the removing the barriers in terms of recruitment processes, in terms of ways of working and making hybrid more accessible to everyone. Thinking of the ways that networking opportunities are given so that it's not becoming a closed club of only a few people, and the same with your promotion decisions as well. I hope you're able to join me tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to be looking at data. What is it the data is telling us about the organisation, the makeup of the organisation, and maybe some of the decisions which are either perpetuating the current order or getting in the way of us maybe extending and diversifying our workforce. So I hope you'll join me for that. If you have any comments, please do add them and I'll get back to you. And if you want to know anything more about the work we do with organisations to build workplaces of belonging, contact me at Mary at agents2, that's the number 2, change.com. Thank you very much, and I am wishing you a great day. Take care.